5 weeks after Operation Epic Fury began, the United States Air Force deployed 18 additional A-10 Warthogs to the Middle East, bringing the total to about 30 aircraft. That means nearly 1/3 of the remaining fleet is now concentrated in a single theater. And this is the very aircraft that had already been scheduled for retirement, the same aircraft the Air Force has spent an entire decade trying to phase out. Yet at this moment, instead of leaving the front lines, more and more of them are being sent directly into the war zone. Why? Because in the Strait of Hormuz, where more than 150 Iranian vessels have been destroyed or disabled since February 28th, the U.S. Air Force discovered a problem that billions of dollars in fifth-generation sensor technology still cannot solve. How to tell a fishing boat from an attack craft among 3,200 civilian vessels on the water. The F-35 has a sensor suite worth more than the aircraft it was designed to replace. But even so, it still cannot distinguish an IRGC PACAN fast attack craft from a dhow while flying at 500 knots. An A-10 pilot can. At roughly 300 knots, under a bubble canopy, the human brain has enough time to see what no algorithm has yet been taught to identify with certainty. The A-10 is being reinforced in the field, even as it is simultaneously being pushed toward retirement. Congress has held the minimum fleet at 103 aircraft through September 2026. The transition plan for 2027 through 2029 has already been submitted. The Pentagon knows how to replace the gun. It knows how to replace the armor. But it still does not know how to replace the eyes. Behind all of this is a physics equation, one that almost no defense channel has explained clearly. And it is also the reason the Pentagon still cannot replace this aircraft. What you are about to hear changes the way you understand every air-to-ground mission over a crowded battlefield. On March 19th, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, confirmed that A-10 Warthogs are actively hunting and attacking IRGC fast attack craft in the Strait of Hormuz. Kill markings on deployed A-10s, examined in detail in a previous episode, confirm that this concept works in real combat. But the question here is no longer whether the A-10 works. We already know it does. The real question is this: what exact advantage does it have that no other aircraft can replicate? And what happens when it is gone? The answer is not just the gun, nor is it only the armor or the operating cost. Those advantages are real, and they have been discussed many times. But Epic Fury exposed something deeper. A fourth requirement that no one accounted for when they drew up the A-10 retirement roadmap. To understand this, we need to talk about a physics equation that almost no one has clearly explained, and that the Pentagon still has not solved. Picture the Strait of Hormuz from 3,000 feet. Below are 3,200 civilian vessels, dhows, container ships, fishing boats, fuel barges, ferries running between Bandar Abbas and Keshm Island. And somewhere among them are IRGC fast attack craft, engines off, rocket rails covered with tarps, painted the same sun-faded blue as the fishing boats around them. From high altitude, on an infrared sensor, they all appear as nearly identical heat signatures. Warm engines, warm hulls, warm water. The sensor sees targets, but it does not see context. The reason comes down to an equation every pilot knows, but very few people explain to the public. When an aircraft passes over a target, that target sweeps across the pilot's field of view at a rate physics calls angular velocity. The principle is simple. The faster the aircraft flies, the faster the target moves across the retina. The lower the altitude, the greater that effect becomes. What matters is not just the aircraft's absolute speed, but how quickly the world below scrolls past the pilot's eyes. And that rate determines whether the pilot still has enough time to recognize what is below, or whether the ground becomes nothing more than a blur. An F-35A crossing the strait at 500 knots and 5,000 feet generates an extremely high angular rate. Targets remain in the pilot's field of view for far too short a time for the human eye to process full contextual detail. At that speed, the pilot cannot rely on what is visible outside the canopy. So attention shifts down to the EOTSAQ-40, the electro-optical infrared targeting system designed to detect and track targets. And it does detect them. It marks contacts on the display. But among 3,200 contacts that all look nearly the same in infrared, which one is the boat with rocket launchers hidden beneath a tarp? The sensor sees temperature, but it does not see intent. Meanwhile, the A-10C flies at 300 knots and 3,000 feet, operating with a much lower angular rate, roughly 40% lower. The pilot looks through a bubble canopy with almost no visual obstruction, and the brain performs a process that no sensor has yet been able to fully replicate. First comes scanning the line of vessels ahead. Then comes contextualizing. Is this boat anchored among civilians, or is it holding a position offset from the shipping lane? Next comes classification. Are those fishing nets or antenna arrays, a fuel drum, or a rocket rail hidden under canvas? And finally comes decision. Has this contact met the threshold for positive identification under the rules of engagement? If yes, engage. If not, circle back and check again. That entire process of scanning, contextualizing, classifying, and deciding requires continuous observation time. And high speed is exactly what takes that precious time away. The faster an aircraft flies, the less time the pilot has to distinguish a fighter from a fisherman. In a battle space where thousands of civilian vessels mix with IRGC attack craft, and where misidentifying even a single target could trigger an international incident, observation time is not a luxury. It is both a legal requirement and an operational one. Think of it this way. A security camera can record that someone entered a building, but only the guard at the door can see that the person is hiding a weapon under a coat. Detection is not the same as identification. In the Strait of Hormuz, the A-10 is the guard at the door, and right now, it is the only one on duty. Of course, technology is not standing still. The next upgraded EOTS generation, part of Block 4 with shortwave infrared and higher resolution, may narrow this gap. But Block 4 is behind schedule. The upgraded sensor is not yet in the fleet, and the gap exists right now. In a previous episode, it was shown that the A-10 simultaneously satisfies 3 requirements that no other platform in the inventory can match: persistence, survivability, and cost efficiency. But Epic Fury revealed a 4th requirement, one that never appeared in any transition plan, because no one anticipated a war that would demand visual identification in such dense civilian clutter. When every replacement option is tested, the obvious first candidate is the F-35A Lightning II. It is one of the most advanced fighters in the inventory. But capability is not the same as suitability. With a standard combat load, the F-35 does not loiter over the target area. It dashes in, strikes, and returns. Its stealth advantage degrades at the low altitudes where close air support truly happens. Its operating cost is around $34,000 per flight hour. And at 500 knots, angular velocity becomes so high that the pilot is forced to depend almost entirely on sensors, even though those sensors cannot classify targets in sea clutter. The F-35 was built for beyond visual range warfare to detect and destroy targets from a distance. It is not the right tool for a mission defined by the need to look out the window. If you remove the pilot entirely, you get the MQ-9 Reaper. Its 14+ hours of endurance solve the persistence problem. But the Reaper has no armor, no redundancy and survivability, and a single 12.7mm round can bring down a $32 million airframe. MQ-9s have already been shot down by Houthi surface-to-air missiles in Yemen in a threat environment less dense than Hormuz. In terms of visual identification, the MQ-9 operator sits in a ground station thousands of miles from the battlefield, observing the world through a sensor feed with more than a second of satellite delay. The operator looks through a straw. The A-10 pilot looks through a full windshield. The next generation promises that artificial intelligence will solve this problem. The Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program already has 2 flight test prototypes. The YFQ-42A from General Atomics and the YFQ-44A from Anduril, designed as autonomous wingmen at roughly $25 to $30 million apiece. But AI today still cannot do the most important thing: positive identification in a cluttered environment. West Point assessments describe current AI image recognition capability as brittle. It fails when it encounters objects outside its training data, when targets are partially obscured, or when a scene is crowded with similar-looking objects. AI does not run a process of scanning, contextualizing, classifying, and deciding. It runs pattern matching. And when the pattern is a fast attack craft painted to resemble a fishing boat, that chain of recognition breaks. Earliest initial operating capability is not expected until 2028, while the gap exists right now. There is one candidate that almost works: the AT-6B Wolverine, a turboprop trainer modified for light attack missions. Its operating cost is under $1,000 per flight hour. It flies at roughly 250 knots with a wide visibility canopy, slow enough for a pilot's eyes to do exactly what an A-10 pilot's eyes do. But the AT-6B carries only light armor. It cannot survive the 12.7mm guns and shoulder-fired missiles that line the Iranian coast. It has no titanium bathtub, no twin engines, no manual flight control backup if hydraulics fail. It has the right eyes, but in the wrong body. It may work in permissive airspace, but it cannot survive over the Strait of Hormuz. That leaves the A-10C Thunderbolt II. It can remain on station for 2.5 hours with external tanks, carries 1,200 pounds of titanium armor around the cockpit, has twin engines and redundant flight controls that still function even if the hydraulics fail, costs about $20,000 per flight hour, and flies at 300 knots under a bubble canopy, keeping angular velocity low enough for the human brain to complete the full 4-step visual process. Previous episodes demonstrated the first 3 requirements. Epic Fury exposed the 4th, and that is the one no one planned for. When every candidate is measured against all 4 criteria, not a single replacement passes. The A-10 is the only aircraft in the inventory that does, and yet it is the one being retired. The United States Air Force is not retiring the A-10 because something fully better already exists. It is retiring the aircraft because the kind of mission the A-10 was built for, low, slow, survivable, and affordable, does not fit the war the Air Force wants to prepare for in the future. The problem is that the war it prepared for is not the war it is actually fighting. That is why the timeline has become urgent. The Air Force has already submitted its transition plan to Congress for fiscal years 2027 through 2029. The A-10 fleet will be drawn down, and the mission will be handed off to a system of systems, with F-35s providing high-altitude overwatch, CCA drones serving as forward sensor nodes, and MQ-9 Reapers maintaining persistent surveillance. The gaps in any single platform are expected to be covered by the network. And yet, in the first week of April 2026, the Air Force deployed 18 additional A-10s to the Middle East, bringing the total to about 30 aircraft. Nearly 1/3 of the fleet Congress required it to keep alive. The purpose is to support potential ground operations along the Iranian coast and around Karg Island, which handles as much as 90% of Iran's oil exports. In other words, the Air Force is reinforcing the very aircraft it is gradually dismantling, sending it into the war that proved it indispensable. The system of systems concept sounds elegant in theory, but it has a physics flaw. Networking solves the problem of coverage by placing sensors in more locations. It does not solve the problem of perceptual resolution. Every individual sensor is still constrained by the same angular velocity, the same thermal clutter, and the same pixel limits. You can build a network of 1,000 cameras, but if each one records at 144p, adding more cameras will not somehow turn the image into 4K. This is a physics problem, not a bandwidth problem. To be fair, AI will improve, sensor resolution will continue to increase, and the CCA program may solve the autonomy challenge by around 2030. But the A-10 will retire before the technology catches up. The gap between what is leaving the inventory and what is entering it is measured in years. And those years happen to coincide with the largest American military campaign since Iraq in 2003. If ground operations expand along the Hormuz coastline, if the mission becomes distinguishing military targets from civilian infrastructure along a contested shore, then that is exactly the kind of equation that demands a pilot's eyes at low speed over hostile terrain. The Air Force has a plan to replace the A-10 with a system, but right now it is still sending 30 A-10s into war because that system simply does not fully exist yet. The problem is not the idea. The problem is the timing. So the real question no longer lies in any one individual piece. The first analysis shows that the A-10 sees target sensors cannot identify because angular velocity at 300 knots gives the pilot enough observation time to process context in dense clutter. The second analysis shows that no replacement platform can satisfy all 4 requirements at the same time. The third analysis shows that the Air Force is reinforcing the A-10 fleet for epic fury, while simultaneously filing the paperwork to retire it. Each line of analysis explains part of the story, but the larger question is this: why does the most technologically advanced Air Force in human history, in the middle of its most significant military campaign in 2 decades, still depend on the eyes of a pilot sitting in a 50-year-old cockpit? The answer is not really about the aircraft. It is about doctrine. For 30 years, the United States Air Force optimized around a single vision of air combat. Beyond visual range, stealth, sensors, network-centric warfare, First look, first shot, first kill. Every budget dollar flowed toward detecting the enemy from a distance and destroying them before visual contact was ever required. The F-22 was built for that. The F-35 was built for that. The B-21 is being built for that as well. The entire force structure was built around the principle that you should never need to get close enough to look out the window. The A-10 was the only aircraft in the inventory that rejected that principle. It was designed to fly close, fly low, and make decisions with human eyes. For 30 years, that made it the odd aircraft out. Not because it failed, but because doctrine moved away from it. Then, epic fury happened. A war where drones blend into the sky, fast boats blend into civilian harbors, and gray zone targets blend into the population. A war where the enemy's strategy is not to overpower American sensors, but to hide beneath their resolution limits. And the aircraft that fits this kind of war, the only aircraft capable of scanning, contextualizing, classifying, and deciding at the pace the human brain requires, is the very aircraft the Air Force spent a decade trying to discard. The proof is not merely theoretical. It is logistical reality. 30 A-10s, 1/3 of the remaining fleet, are being surged into the theater, not because doctrine says they belong there, but because physics demands it. Someday, the A-10 Warthog will land for the last time. When that moment comes, the gun may be mothballed, and the titanium bathtub may end up in a museum. But the problem it leaves behind will not disappear. The physics of visual identification, angular velocity, observation time, and the limits of every sensor in a cluttered environment do not retire with the airframe. An equation is still an equation, and equations do not care about transition plans. The next war that demands eyes directly on target at low altitude will still demand those eyes. The next harbor packed with civilian vessels and hidden combatants will still require a pilot flying slow enough to see the difference. The question is not whether the A-10 should be kept forever, because nothing flies forever. The question is this: when 70 fast boats hide among 3,000 fishing vessels, and the rules of engagement require positive identification before the first shot, who will be the one looking out the window? Because the physics problem the A-10 is solving will not disappear just because the airframe leaves the sky.